Sangria bloomed across my cream silk like a crimson accusation, and Crystal's smile cut through the hush like broken glass. "Now you look as cheap as you are," she breathed, raising her empty glass as if it were a trophy. I didn't flinch. I walked to the bride, bent close enough to smell the gardenias pinned in her hair, and whispered one sentence that drained the color from her face as surely as the wine had stained my dress. 5 minutes later, it wasn't me the pavilion was staring at. It was Crystal caught in the spotlight she had set for someone else. I'm Margaret Thompson Maggie to those who've needed a warm dinner or a last spare key, and at 64, I believed I had outlived every shape grief could take. My son David taught me that grief can wear a wedding ring and a brave face. Losing him 3 years ago left a quiet in my bones I still can't name. His boy Tyler, my grandson, my pride grew from a lanky freshman tripping over shoelaces into the kind of man who remembers who set the table when everyone else forgot. The morning of his wedding to Sophia began soft and ordinary steam on the bathroom mirror. A pearl necklace David gave me for my 60th reflecting sun in delicate pips. The calm of a vow day that promised joy if we could only stay out of the way. I tell myself now I should have worn armor. Crystal, David's widow. Tyler's stepmother wore that gracious smile she keeps the way some women keep a switchblade, and every time her eyes grazed me, they left a thin welt of warning. She has always loved the center of a room the way a moth loves a porch light, fluttering to it, circling, convincing everyone the light belongs to her. At the ceremony, Tyler stood in his navy suit like a promise kept. Sophia floated in her grandmother's lace with a shy steadiness that made me believe in gentle things again. I dabbed away tears. And across the aisle, Crystal glowed in a curated cluster of book club friends, touching arms and tilting her head as if every word spoken near her required her blessing. If the whispers had been smoke, we would have seen the fire. Instead, they were tucked into corners and traded by bar napkins. I noticed them because I've lived long enough to feel temperature change before the rain. Crystal kept pulling people aside, murmuring with furrowed concern, and then guiding their eyes toward the head table where Sophia laughed with her parents. Surprise first, then the stiff little frown of judgment like dominoes set carefully by someone who knew exactly how they'd fall. I drifted near a cluster of Tyler's college friends and smiled at the flowers long enough to hear Crystal's sugar sharpen. "It's such a shame," she confided, "how some families hide the mess under the rug." When she caught me listening, she just widened her eyes as if to say, "Who? Me?" During dinner, I found myself at the overflow table, second cousins and polite strangers, while Crystal presided at the head like a conductor, cueing crescendos. It stung, being the groom's only living grandmother and relegated to the edge. But distance offers vantage. I watched her gestures grow a little larger, her stories a shade more dramatic, concern curdling into certainty. I excused myself to the ladies' room, not because I needed powder, but because restrooms hold the truest weather report at any wedding. Over the hiss of hairspray I heard, "Terrible for Tyler prison time for the father, the mother with a bottle." Another voice clucked, "Poor boy," on his wedding day. That was when my hands curled into fists I kept low by my skirt. The Chen's sweet, steady Robert who does pro bono taxes every spring. Linda who bakes more cookies than a kitchen ought to hold. The neatest scandal in their life is excess Tupperware. I waited for the room to clear. Then I did what I swore I would do if Crystal ever decided to turn rumor into ruin. I called Patricia Winters, the forensic accountant I'd quietly engaged 6 weeks earlier when the quarterly statements for Tyler's trust fund began to hum with the wrong notes. As co-trustee after David's death, I still held oversight papers Crystal preferred to forget existed. The numbers in those reports and the tone of Crystal's reassurances had never matched. Not once. "It's time," I told Patricia, my voice steadier than my pulse. Activate everything we discussed. When I returned to the pavilion, the fairy lights looked colder. Crystal was on her feet, glass of sangria trembling with triumph, cutting across the room toward me like someone arriving to accept an award. She raised her voice just enough to hush the silverware and said, with the pitying sweetness she saves for her sharpest words, "Margaret, thank you for being so understanding about what we learned tonight." I rose slowly, smoothing the silk that would soon bear witness, and asked with a smile sharp enough to cut through her performance, "And what exactly have we learned?" Crystal. Her eyes glittered. "Oh, you know," she said, tone syrupy and loud enough for half the pavilion, "about Sophia's family background. It must be difficult discovering the criminal past and all." She gestured vaguely toward the head table, where Sophia sat frozen mid-laugh. "Criminal background," I repeated, keeping my voice clear and deliberate so even the waitstaff could hear. "That's a very serious accusation. Do you have documentation of any criminal activity?" The smile flickered, but she pressed on. "Well, not documentation exactly, but people have been doing their research. Tyler deserves to know what kind of family he's marrying into." It was a masterclass in cruelty vague enough to sound cautious, loud enough to sound true. I asked again, softly, "And what did this research reveal?" Her posture straightened. She decided to double down. "Robert Chen has tax problems with the IRS, and Linda's been battling alcoholism for years, significant debt, unstable background. I thought Tyler should know before it's too late." A silence fell thick as fog. Tyler stood frozen at the microphone, Sophia's face pale, her parents stricken. I let the quiet stretch until even the candles seemed to hold their breath. Then I said, "That's fascinating, because the Robert Chen I know volunteers every spring preparing free tax returns for low-income families, and Linda hasn't touched a drink in 15 years. She's the designated driver for her book club." Crystal's cheeks flushed crimson, but she tried to sneer. "You're defending them because you don't want to admit you were fooled. Too, people like that hide their problems well." "People like what?" "Crystal," I asked. Her restraint snapped. "People who marry for money. Gold diggers who target wealthy families and take what they can." That was when she lost her grip, literally. The sangria arced through the air in a perfect, awful curve, landing square across my cream silk dress. Gasps rippled. Even the band stopped mid-note. "Now you look as cheap as you are," she hissed, shaking the empty glass like punctuation. The wine spread warm down my front, sticky and smelling faintly of fruit and humiliation. But I didn't move. I looked at the stain, then at her trembling hand, and smiled. "Thank you, Crystal," I said evenly. "You've just given me the perfect opening." And with that, I turned toward the head table, toward Sophia, who sat bewildered, eyes wide as her wedding gown was white. I leaned down, close enough for the nearest tables to hear without catching the words, "whole." "Your new mother-in-law has been stealing from Tyler's trust fund for 3 years, I murmured. "The police already know. I have the proof in my purse." Sophia's breath hitched, color drained from her cheeks. She looked at me, then at Tyler, and whispered something that made him lower his speech notes in confusion. "What did you just tell her?" Crystal demanded, stalking forward, the glass still clutched like a weapon. I turned to face the room, my ruined dress catching the soft lights like armor now. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and carrying. "I apologize for the interruption, but there seems to be some confusion that deserves clarity." Tyler's voice cracked from across the table. "Grandma? What's going on?" "What's going on?" I said gently. "Is that your stepmother has been spreading lies about your wife's family while embezzling money from your trust fund?" The collective inhale from the guests felt like a storm drawing breath. I reached into my evening purse and pulled out the folded papers Patricia had delivered that morning. This is a forensic accounting report. It shows that over the past 3 years, approximately $180,000 have been withdrawn for what Crystal labeled as management expenses. Murmurs broke out. Chairs scraped. Tyler's eyes widened. "That's not true," Crystal cried. "She's lying. She's a bitter old woman who can't stand that David chose me." "Actually," I said, keeping my tone almost kind, "some of those management expenses include the lease payments on your Mercedes, a $35,000 kitchen renovation, and 2 European vacations totaling $28,000. Tyler turned to her slowly. "You told me the trust was underperforming. You said I was lucky it hadn't lost more money. I was protecting it," she shouted, "protecting that money from people like her." She pointed at Sophia. "Desperate now, gold diggers." That was when Robert Chen stood, mild as milk, his voice calm but ringing like a bell. "Ma'am," he said, "I hate to break it to you, but my daughter's trust fund is actually larger than your stepson's. We sold our accounting firm to start it when she turned 18. A few people gasped. Then, as if the tension snapped, someone started clapping. Within seconds, the applause spread slow, steady, inevitable. Crystal's face twisted in disbelief as she realized she was no longer the ringmaster but the spectacle. The applause faded into the kind of silence that hums with judgment. Crystal stood frozen, her painted smile cracking at the edges. I wasn't finished, not after 3 years of watching her drain my son's legacy while pretending virtue. "There's more," I said, lifting a second folded document from my purse. The paper trembled only slightly in my fingers, though my heart beat like a drum. "This is the original trust agreement David created for Tyler. The one Crystal told him was too complicated to understand." Tyler reached for it, hands shaking, eyes scanning the text as though it might rewrite his memories. "What does it say?" he asked, voice low. "It says," I replied, watching Crystal's face fade to ash, "that as the surviving co-trustee, I retain oversight rights, which means that when evidence of misconduct arises, I have the authority to freeze the account and request a full audit." Crystal's voice came out thin, like a thread about to snap. "You can't do that." "Actually," I said, "I already did. This afternoon, after Patricia completed her investigation." A ripple ran through the crowd. Shock, disbelief, the slow dawning thrill of witnessing justice. Crystal turned from me to Tyler, eyes wide with panic. "She's lying." "Tyler, she's always hated me. You know that. She's been jealous since the day your father married me." Tyler's face hardened. "Dad made you co-trustee to keep Mom's memory alive, not to bleed me dry." She raised her voice, desperate now. "Everything I did was for this family. I sacrificed everything for you." "You sacrificed honesty," I said softly, "and decency." Sophia stood then, quiet but unshakable, her calm presence cutting through the noise. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice carrying across the tables, "you've spent this entire day trying to humiliate me and my family. And for what? To protect money that was never yours." The younger guests exchanged glances. Even Crystal's loyal friends looked uneasy. But before Crystal could retort, a man's voice rose from the back, steady, professional. "Mrs. Patterson," said Detective Williams, stepping forward in his dark suit, "we'd like to have a word about some financial irregularities." The sound of his badge snapping open might as well have been thunder. Crystal stumbled back, disbelief splashing across her face. "You can't just show up here. This is a wedding." "And yet here we are," Williams replied, tone even. "We have documentation of unauthorized withdrawals and falsified quarterly reports from your stepson's trust account. I'm afraid we'll need you to come with us." "No," she cried, her voice pitching high. "This is a setup." You're all conspiring against me because I tried to protect this family." Tyler stood, his chair clattering to the floor. "Protect it. You stole from me. You lied about Sophia's family. You turned my father's death into your paycheck." For a moment, the fury in his voice made him look older, the kind of old that grief carves into a person. "I'm the one who raised you," she screamed. "I'm your mother. Jennifer Walsh was my mother." Tyler said quietly, "You were just the woman who saw an opportunity and took it." Detective Williams stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the pavilion lights. "Mrs. Patterson, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft." Gasps rippled through the guests again. Crystal took one trembling step back, then another, her voice trembling between anger and terror. "You'll regret this, Tyler, without me. You're nothing I made this family know, Crystal." Tyler replied softly, "You made yourself comfortable in it. There's a difference." As Williams guided her toward the exit, the night seemed to inhale. The band still hadn't moved. The fairy lights flickered, catching on the crimson stain drying on my dress. When the door closed behind her, the collective breath of the guests released all at once, like an exorcism. Slowly, cautiously. The music began again, a soft waltz, as if to test whether joy was still possible. Sophia crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. Her voice was low, trembling. "You saved our wedding, Maggie." I smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "No, dear. You saved it by staying kind in the face of cruelty." Tyler joined us, eyes bright but dry. "Grandma, you've been investigating this for months, haven't you? Since spring." I admitted. I noticed the numbers didn't add up, but I needed proof. "Patricia found everything." His jaw tightened, then softened. "You gave me back Dad's honor." The band played louder, laughter hesitantly returning like birds after thunder. Guests approached one by one, some to apologize for believing Crystal's whispers, others simply to squeeze my hand. The Chens were radiant now, relief replacing humiliation. Robert chuckled. "In 30 years of accounting, I've seen many forms of fraud, but never one undone so theatrically." Linda smiled through tears. "I suppose justice has its own timing." I looked down at my wine-stained dress. The scarlet dried into silk like memory. "Sometimes justice needs a stage," I said, "and tonight, she got one." When the police car's taillights vanished into the dark, the reception breathed again, tentative, fragile, as if no one was quite sure whether laughter was permitted after witnessing a life unravel. The band struck a slow, hopeful rhythm, guests whispering relief as they reclaimed their seats. I stood by the fountain for a long time, watching the water catch the light like scattered glass. My dress clung heavy with dried sangria, the color of consequence. Tyler and Sophia approached together, hand in hand, their fingers woven tightly as though to anchor each other. "Grandma," Tyler said quietly. "How long did you know I hesitated before answering?" 6 months, I admitted. When I asked for the quarterly reports, the math didn't fit. Crystal kept assuring me the market was volatile. I believed her until I didn't. Then I hired Patricia. Sophia's eyes glistened, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You did all this for us, for you, and for David," I said softly. "He trusted me to protect what he built. I just wish it hadn't come to this." Tyler looked toward the door where Crystal had disappeared, his jaw tight with anger and grief interlaced. "I can't believe she was capable of all that," he murmured. "You always hope the monster isn't in the house, you hope it's outside somewhere." His words broke something gentle in me. I touched his arm. "She fooled a lot of people, sweetheart. That's what manipulators do. They wrap lies in charm and call it love. Sophia squeezed his hand, but you saw through it. That's what matters. Around us, guests began to gather again, their voices rising in cautious cheer. The cake was served. Laughter flickered like candlelight. I watched as Tyler raised a glass, not for Crystal, not for revenge, but for resilience, to truth, he said simply, and the crowd echoed it like a prayer. Later that night, after the last sparkler faded and the couple drove off beneath a canopy of applause, I sat alone in the quiet garden. The faint strains of music drifted from the pavilion, the scent of lilies mixed with wine and night air. My phone buzzed a message from Patricia. Full cooperation from the bank. Recovery process started. You did good tonight. Margaret. I smiled, exhausted. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes she whispers through paperwork and patience. 6 months passed before the full balance returned, nearly $197,000, including the rental income Crystal had been pocketing from the apartment above the garage. Tyler and Sophia used none of it. They bought a modest home 4 blocks from mine with their own savings, choosing freedom over inheritance. The trust remained sealed for their future children, as David had intended. On one Saturday morning, Tyler came by with 2 coffees, setting one beside me on the garden table. Patricia says everything's finalized, he said, the morning sun catching in his hair. All of it's back. He paused, almost shy. Have you heard from her? A few cards. I said birthdays, holidays, always apologies and promises of counseling. She says she's trying to change. Tyler stirred his coffee slowly. I don't hate her anymore, he said finally. I don't think I can forgive her yet, but I'm done letting her ruin the good memories too. Sophia says forgiveness isn't a gift for them. It's one you give yourself. I smiled at that. She's a wise girl. Takes after you, he said. And for a moment I saw my son's grin flicker through his face. Sophia appeared from the corner of the yard, a basket of muffins in hand and sunlight tangled in her hair. I made your apple cinnamon recipe, she announced. Tyler says it still tastes better when you make it, but we'll see. She set the basket down, the smell of butter and spice filling the air. It had become our quiet ritual coffee, baked goods, the slow rhythm of healing disguised as small talk. The house next door had never felt so full of life. But the story didn't truly end there. A year later, I received a call from a number I almost didn't recognize. It was Detective Williams, his voice warm, older now. Mrs. Thompson, I thought you'd like to know Crystal Patterson has completed her court-ordered counseling. She's requested a meeting with you and Tyler, says she wants to make amends. For a long moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Amends, I repeated softly. What kind? Not forgiveness, he said. She wants to return something. Items belonging to your son, letters, documents, things she hid. Says they might help Tyler understand his father better. I agreed to the meeting, though part of me feared reopening old wounds. But Tyler insisted. If she's finally ready to tell the truth, we should hear it. The following week, we sat across from Crystal in a quiet community center conference room. The woman before us was barely recognizable, smaller somehow, stripped of the armor of wealth. Her hands trembled as she placed a wooden box on the table. Tyler, she whispered, nothing I did was your fault. You were a child. And I used that to justify my greed. Her voice cracked. These belong to you letters your father wrote to your mother, photos from your early childhood, and jewelry that was meant for your future wife. Tyler opened the box slowly, eyes tracing the ribbons that bound old letters, the faded photographs, the tiny velvet case holding 2 rings. Why now, he asked. Crystal's answer came in a voice emptied of performance. Because I finally understand that love isn't ownership. I tried to fill a space I never deserved, and when I couldn't, I destroyed what I envied. Tears rolled down her face. Your father never stopped loving Jennifer. Even after we married, he kept these hidden. I was jealous of a ghost. Tyler sat perfectly still, the letters trembling in his hands. The air in that small room felt thick with things unsaid, like grief had been waiting years for this single exhale. He never stopped loving her. Crystal repeated, voice frayed at the edges. And I could never accept that. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself from the truth that David married me out of loneliness, not love. She pressed her palms together. I've spent the past year learning what control costs. I thought money and influence could buy belonging, but all it did was rot what little good was left in me. She looked at me, then no hostility, no defiance, just an exhausted honesty that almost made me ache. Margaret, she said softly, I used to resent how much of him you still had. You were his past, and I wanted to erase it. I'm sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I can tell the truth now. I met her eyes, searching for the woman I'd once feared, and saw only the remnants of someone who had finally looked in the mirror without excuses. Truth is a start, I said quietly, but it's the living with it that makes it real. Tyler unfolded one of the letters. The paper was yellowed, creased with time. His father's handwriting flowed across it in the confident strokes of a man still full of hope. He read aloud a single line, If anything ever happens to me, tell our son I loved him enough to fill 10 lifetimes. His voice broke on the last words, and I reached out, resting my hand on his shoulder. He did love you, I whispered. He always did. Crystal nodded, tears streaking her face. There's one more thing, she said, sliding a small envelope across the table. It's a copy of David's final letter to you, written the week before his accident. I found it and hid it. I was jealous that he'd written to you. Not me. Tyler hesitated before opening it. The note was short, written in David's steady, thoughtful script. Son, never measure love by what it gives you, but by what it asks you to give back. Be kind, even when it hurts. That's where real strength hides. Tyler folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. For a moment, no one spoke. The quiet felt sacred. Then Crystal stood, hands clasped, and said, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth about who your father really was and who I wasn't. Tyler looked up at her. The anger long since burned out, leaving only weariness and clarity. Thank you for returning these, he said simply. That's enough? She nodded, gave a faint, uncertain smile, and walked out into the afternoon light. I watched her go, a silhouette shrinking against the sun, and felt something, maybe pity, maybe closure settle gently in my chest. Later. Tyler and I sat in the car outside the community center. He turned the wooden box over in his hands. She was right about one thing, he said softly. Dad never got over losing Mom. These letters, they're filled with her. Every word, every hope. I understand now why it was so easy for Crystal to step into that space. He was broken, and she offered convenience, not healing. I nodded, eyes on the horizon. Grief makes fools of the best of us. But truth rebuilds. He smiled faintly. I'm going to share these with Sophia. I want her to know what real love looks like, the kind that outlives tragedy. His gaze drifted to the box. And someday, I'll tell our children about their grandmother Jennifer. Not the lies Crystal told, but who she really was. I placed my hand over his. That's the gift your father wanted for you, the kind that keeps goodness alive. Months passed, and the rhythm of ordinary life returned, softened by time but deepened by all it had revealed. Tyler and Sophia welcomed a baby girl that spring, a round-cheeked little miracle with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet strength. They named her Jennifer, after the grandmother she'd never meet but would always know. On Sundays, they came for dinner, the house echoing with baby laughter and the clink of dishes. No one ever mentioned Crystal again, but she lingered at the edge of memory, not as a shadow, but as a lesson. I sometimes look at that old dress, the one stained with sangria and truth. I never had it cleaned. The red bloom across the cream silk reminds me that sometimes dignity is forged in the moments meant to humiliate us. It reminds me that love, real love, isn't soft, it's steady. It protects even when it bleeds. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying with me through this story. Remember, truth has a way of finding its light, even through the darkest silk. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place? Because sometimes justice begins with the courage to stand up in a room full of silence.